My name is Andrew Shelton. I am one of the core crew members, relatively new. This is my favorite nonprofit nonprofit thing. Number two is the numbers 2 and 3 are the Whatcom Democrats. I'm on the board, and there's a new shop in town called the Colshan Carbon Trust, which is working on carbon sequestration with local landowners, which we're pretty excited about. But speaking of land, we do have a new acknowledgement that we worked up. So we at Indivisible Bellingham acknowledge that this beautiful place in which we live, Whatcom County, is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lummi and Mixac peoples, the original inhabitants of this land who are still here and who continue to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. So we humbly offer this land acknowledgement with gratefulness for their enduring care of our shared lands and waters. May we honor and nurture our relationship with our Salish Coast neighbors as we shoulder our shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. And the mission statement for Indivisible Bellingham, IB for short, is we're united by the principles of fairness, inclusion, tolerance, and a just society for everyone. And we're committed to acting through nonviolent civic engagement, political involvement, and consistent pressure on elected officials to pursue those principles. So we have a few short announcements before we begin tonight's presentation. The Senators Shewmake and Lovelett. So Karen Hoffman will be giving us a brief on our postcard campaign. So Karen, take it away.
Hi everyone. I am a member of the core crew, and along with Robin Thomas, our leaders of our postcarding project. We've done this since 2019, and we've written tens of thousands of friendly handwritten cards to voters all over the United States. We work with national groups in important swing states and to support voters of color in those states that are using voter suppression. So we work in those critical states because it's key to protecting democracy, something that we all care so much about, and to fight against big money that can sway elections that determine all of our futures. Grassroots effort to protect the right to vote are supported by our cards. So, for instance, we just mailed 1,000 cards to voters. This was Monday. 1,000 cards to voters in Georgia. They have a primary coming on May 24th, where we gave them the name of their of where they can go and a link to where they can go and learn more about their voting status. And we told them why it was really important to vote in that primary. We work with a national group called Reclaim Our Vote, and these were all people of color in Georgia. We're working on another 1,000 cards to Alabama that will be put in about 2 weeks, and same date for their primary, and same Reclaim Our Vote, and a similar message to them to get out the vote in, and how important it was for people of Alabama to vote in that primary. It's nonpartisan. We're not going for any candidate at all in these cards. So if you want to join us, send an email to indivisiblebellingham.org, and I'll put in the chat a link to that, and just put a note saying I want to join, and write postcards for Indivisible Bellingham. That's all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen, for all your hard work. That's ground floor democracy in action right there. So Kevin Leja is up next with an update on the Take Action Network, which we at Indivisible Bellingham joined in February.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm Kevin Leja. I've been with Indivisible Bellingham as a co-leader since about mid-2017. And I handle the website, which I need help with, and also social media, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I think we all know this is going to be a pretty critical year in politics, and we'll be doing everything we can to protect democracy and help elect Democrats to the House and Senate, both locally and nationally. And it's really important that everyone get and stay involved in our political process in every election there is, from dog catcher to, fire district, all the way up to senators and congressmen. But I know that looks different for each person. Not everyone can do everything that we're suggesting. We all do what we can, basically, and that's the most important thing. Some of us may only have time to write a postcard or two. Some might be able to doorbell or phone bank, and some may just be able to donate so that others can do the groundwork. Again, it's really important that we all stay involved. I think we all know what the challenges are this year and will be for 2024 as well. Postcarding, Karen talked about, it's a great way to help in vulnerable races across the country with low information voters in many cases. And I wanted to mention the Take Action Network and two other things that where you might want to get involved this year. The first is I'd like you to join in a communication network that Indivisible Bellingham joined this past winter. It's called the Take Action Network, or TAN, and it was developed by the Washington State Indivisible Network, or WIN. TAN is a web portal that enables you to easily interact with your legislators on bills. It also allows you to follow what's going on with town halls and voting campaigns and other important issues that a variety of Washington State progressive organizations are involved in, including us. I'd like to say that TAN is like having a personal assistant for your own personal assistant for progressive action. It's a great and easy way to get involved. It doesn't take much time, 20 seconds, and you can send an email to Senator Lovelett or Representative Shewmake, just like that, really easy. And it's especially designed for our state senators and representatives during the legislative session, but it also can be used year round. So we encourage everybody to get involved in that and start using it. And I'll put a link to more information or sign up link in the chat so you can copy them and check them out. The next is the Truth Brigade. The Truth Brigade is an amazing effort by Indivisible National to stem the tide of disinformation on social media and misinformation. If you use social media, this may be a really great thing for you and a way for you to get involved. The fourth Wednesday of every month, and that means there's one coming up next Wednesday, the 27th, there are workshops on learning how to disrupt disinformation on social media, mostly Facebook and Twitter, but other ways as well. They launch new message campaigns, they orient new members, they have workshops, they provide Ask Me Anything discussions with staff and disinformation fighting pros from around the country. So as I believe last week they had, or last month they had Judd Legum, who is a guy who does a lot of accountability journalism on a website called Just Information. Last but not least is the Rural Caucus. It's another effort by Indivisible National, and we know that rural communities tend to be a lot more diverse than are displayed in the media, but at least for our area, rural Whatcom County is majority white and working class, and there are winnable votes in that demographic group that are needed to turn the tide in our districts. The next Rural Caucus is Wednesday of next week, and I'll put the link in the chat again. They'll be talking about how to bridge the gap between rural and urban and suburban communities through good messaging and organizing and education, and looking critically at how we can repair the gap and create solidarity. I believe Indivisible Skagit has been working with them quite a bit with a group within Indivisible Skagit, and they've had a lot of success in the rural communities there. So that's it for me. I'll leave the information in the chat. If you don't know what I'm talking about with the chat is basically, if you go down to the bottom of your screen and mouse over the bottom of your screen, it'll say chat, and you can click on chat and it'll open up a box for you on the side, and you'll be able to see all the links. So Andrew, back to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kevin. Yeah, TAN is a very good tool when you got a minute to engage in some activism. So on to the main show, a few words about the format tonight. The purpose of the meeting will just be to let Liz and Sharon recap important bills they sponsored or worked on in the past legislative session, specifically bills that passed and how they'll affect our community, but also bills they supported that didn't pass and what will happen with those. And additionally, we'd like to hear from each of you about what they'll be prioritizing in the next session, which begins in winter of next year. We'll be taking questions from the audience, time permitting. So if you have a question, click on that chat icon that Kevin just described, and then type in your question and Kevin will collate them and specify the questions for one senator or the other or both, or excuse me, Representative Senator Shewmake, Freudian slip. You can also email your question to indivisiblebellingham@gmail.com at any time during the meeting. So we hope to wrap up about 8 o'clock. So if 15 minutes each, if that sounds fair for each of the legislators, that would be rocking. And we'll start off with our state rep in the 42nd, our very own Sharon Shewmake.
Hi, thank you all. It's so nice to see some faces and names. Sorry, my voice is a little crackly. So I wanted to talk about, so I had some good bills. We have some bills that we need to do, but I think one of the things that's really key in this budget is, in this last session, was also the budget. We made some incredible investments and some things that I think we should all feel really proud of. So you're going to hear from Republicans, there's this big surplus. Why didn't they give any of it back? And they're wrong. We did. So we did two big pieces of tax reform. And one of those is increasing the B&O tax credit. So for small businesses. So the B&O tax is, it's a beast. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're thinking about how to tax people fairly and efficiently, how to raise those revenues. We're working on that going forward. But what we did is we increased the exemption for small businesses to $125,000, and we increased the tax credit to small businesses as well. And so that's going to be delivering relief, not just broad-based relief where it impacts Amazon and they get a lot more of the money than your local next door restaurant is. It's making sure that we're targeting that, those tax cuts and that support. Another thing that we're going to see coming through in 2023 is the working families tax rebate. So that is a match to the federal earned income tax credit, which is one of the, as an economist, I can tell you economists are usually like poo-pooing on social programs. That's not always true, but we are kind of grumpy and always showing how things can be more efficient. That is not true with the earned income tax credit. That is something that like economists love across the board. And every time we study it, we keep finding more impacts, right? We see that kids do better at school and parents are less stressed and people work more and they get more ahead and like they feel more fulfilled in their job, like all of these things that are really important to us. And it's even bipartisan, right? So we'd had that on the books for years. We'd never funded it. There was a lot of policy pieces to sort out. We had to have some bills on that. We're getting there in 2023, and I'm really excited about that. It's going to come right when we really need that relief, as we're starting to see the federal stuff disappear. Some other things we did too that I think we should be really proud about in this budget are we put a lot of money into schools, into our K through 12. We put money into early education because we see what has happened with small businesses. They've had to pivot so many times. Part of that now, it's at first it was, you know, how do I get dividers? How do I get masks for my employees? What do we do with my employees? Now it's been, how do I find employees? What's happening with the labor force? And I don't think there's one answer to what's happening with the labor force, but part of that is people don't have a safe place to keep their kids. And so making sure that we are increasing the wages for early learning providers, the reimbursement rates, but also making sure that we're able to create conditions where they can thrive. So they can create new businesses, build some of the capital facilities, make sure that they have the workers that are needed. We also put a lot of money into education, K through 12, early education, but also higher ed as well. And so when we look at the K through 12 stuff, we had to give raises to the teachers because they are seeing inflation the same way everyone else is. And so we wanted to make sure that they don't need to leave teaching because they can't afford to be teaching. We also made sure, this is Rep Rules Bill, we did an incredible work in putting more therapists in schools. So it's a whole lot of money, making sure, I heard from teachers over and over again about what it was like to teach in schools, and they're exhausted. And I get it, I'm exhausted. We're all exhausted. I had some of my best students just not turning in work, and they weren't lazy students, they just had life hit them. And so I've been tracking them down. Even this, right before this, I was emailing them being like, have you done this? Da, 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 da. And like students that usually do well. Life has just been happening fast and furiously, and especially with our youth, and that youth mental health care component is so critically important. Some of the other things we did too with this budget are, we heard about the nursing shortage. So we made sure that we were funding not just nurses. So they're mostly like, we did fund we increased a lot of the provider pay for at-home care and folks that we know we needed to pay more. We want them to stay in their jobs. But we also made sure that the pipeline for nurses was continuing. And so that pipeline requires that we pay the people who are teaching the nurse questions, sorry, I saw questions pop up and I just said that word. They're teaching the nurses. We're making sure that we're paying them a pay that's competitive with what they would be doing as a nurse, right? We want to make sure that the teachers are making less money teaching than they would be actually nursing. And so we were told that we had to do that to make sure that we have people doing that. And so we did do that. So you look at where we spent it, it was like 300 million in levy stabilization, 100 million for mental health in the schools, which grows to about $1 billion over the budget planning cycles. We saw about 100 million to children and youth, early learning, childcare. You're going to hear Republicans say they couldn't even do a tax on diapers. Well, that's because, again, a tax cut on diapers would be something that impacts everyone, whether they need it or not. What we did is instead we targeted it with a diaper subsidy for the people that we know need it the most, right? So if we're going to cut taxes, maybe instead we can figure out, well, who do we really need to make sure that we're doing it? We did things like making sure the opportunity scholarships, which target people who may not have an opportunity otherwise to go to college to get into STEM fields. We made sure that those also now go to apprenticeships as well, right? So expanding the pool of people that want to be trained, that want to find a good job, all of that wonderful stuff that we really care so much about. We did some important work on things like Digital Equity Act. So making sure that seniors and anyone else on the other side of the digital divide, they can be included in this. You need the internet to get a job. You need the internet to go to school. You need the internet to attend an Indivisible meeting, right? And so we know that that's really important. We stabilized paid family and medical leave, which people had relied on a lot more during the pandemic. And then we also did some things on public safety. You're going to hear people talking about public safety and being really angry about it. And I want you to know that we went and the first thing that we did in 2021, we set a use of force, and that's what has been causing a lot of this tensions. We said, these are the times when we want you to lose force. And I do think that we made some mistakes on that and we fixed it, right? We heard from the community and we went back and we fixed it. And that's always going to be something that's difficult to do. When you do a broad statewide policy that preempts the local policies. But we also, when we really look at what's happening, I think a large part of it, I was talking to a police chief and they were saying, well, we'd love to do community policing, but we don't have enough staff. We have all these unfilled positions. And so we more than doubled the number of training slots so that police officers can be hired where they need to go and they need to do the work. We have everyone in our community that wants to feel safe, and everyone really means everyone. And that means that we have people that can address some of the pieces. The last thing before I talk about my bills is we did all this budget work and we ended with reserves of 12.4%, which is an all-time high, tied with where we were in 2020 when this pandemic hit us. And I think that that's something to feel really good about because we don't know what's coming up next. This has been a really volatile time. I'm going to cross my fingers and say the economy is going to go great. It's going to lift up people who are on the bottoms. All these things are going to be wonderful, but we don't know, right? And so I am really glad that we're prepared for that next pivot. I think that's great news going forward because we saw in the 2007 recession, when the legislature, Liz and I, neither one of us were there, when they cut, what we saw is that the folks in Seattle kind of did fine in their recovery, but the folks in the rural area, the folks that were lower income, they had a much longer recovery as a result of that. And we also saw that a lot of our social support systems maybe never are still recovering from that, right? Talk to people that use in-home care and some of these sponsored things, and they'll tell you that it got worse. And I sometimes hear about our systems and I'm always talking with Alicia, how do we make this better? How do we make it easier for families who need this care to access it? So the bills that I worked on that I passed were on, I've been thinking a lot about, we have the Climate Commitment Act that gets us to where we need to be on climate change, right? We have to follow that, and hopefully the pricing, I think it will. I'm an economist, I love pricing. So we're gonna get where we need with the cap and trade, but it's a major change in our economy, right? And so when you see changes in the economy like that, you wonder, well, who's going to be able to benefit from that and who's going to be left out? And I think we need to be really intentional about making sure that we don't leave people out. So I had two bills thinking about how do we make sure that everyone's part of this. One was low income community solar. And so I have solar panels on my roof. I can do that because I own my home and I have access to credit, although it was actually the previous tenant that built them, but whatever. I could put more solar panels on my roof if I wanted to. That's not something that everyone has access to. Maybe they have a shady roof and they can't do it. In that case, a community solar program is a great option where they can buy a share and then kind of use that solar on the grid. But low income folks don't even necessarily have that upfront capital. It might make sense for them over the course of the life of the solar panel to pay up front and then have lower costs through the rest of it. That's the case that's been in our house. But if you don't have that access to credit, if you don't have the money sitting in your bank account, you really can't take advantage of that. So what we did is we bought down some of the low income pieces, and they'll be able to, like a company could go out and create a low income community solar program, sell the shares to someone, but those shares are subsidized for the people that are low income. The other thing that we did was making sure that the working Washingtonians see themselves in this green energy future. And so we did some targeted tax credits to make sure that we know we're going to need to build a bunch of devices. Either Washington State's going to be building them here or we're going to be building them elsewhere and importing them. We'd like to see them here. We'd like to see them built using high labor standards, making sure that these are good family wage jobs where the workers have a voice in their employment. And so we also paired them with these high labor standards at the same time. So I'm really excited about those. I think going forward, my focus is going to be on housing, housing, housing. I do not think that we got as far as we needed to on affordable housing. We did put $400 million into the Housing Trust Fund. That is a historic number. It's great. It's going to produce about 4,000 homes, according to the governor's estimate. That includes some tiny homes in villages. And like, that's how many we just need in Whatcom County. Like, that's not, like, those are important homes, and there's got to be affordable housing as part of this, because there are folks that we don't want on the street and they're going to need some sort of subsidy, but we can't make sure that, you know, the young people today are able to get into our home just by funding the Housing Trust Fund. That's just not going to work. That is not the only housing affordability strategy. And so the way I see it, we either have to build up or we have to build out. I'd like to do a little bit of both. So I've been working with some of our small cities to figure out the pieces of annexation that just don't work well for them. They want to do some of this building, but there's just some pieces where you have to preserve this ridiculous piece of wetland that isn't very functional, is where all the garbage like goes into, when they'd much rather preserve a functional piece of wetland, right? So let's look for those pieces like that and see what we can do. Let's look at things like condo liability reform. Let's have those discussions. The builders are telling me about that. There's some other pieces along the way. I'm open to all the ideas, but I also think that we also have to look at the regulations on building up. And so Liz worked with me really hard on a bill that would have, she made it way better, and she shepherded it through the Senate, and then some other senators killed it. It wasn't Liz, but now I know where they are and we're going to figure it out. So this bill would have essentially said you can build, every city needs to allow people to build an ADU, and so that's like a mother-in-law, like if you have a portion of your house and it's like attached, right? And a detached ADU of a certain size. And so there's some limitations, like if you're in Lake Whatcom watershed, you probably don't want to do it there. But let's say that you can do that, you can do those two types. And then we're also trying to remove owner occupancy, because we see that as one of the major barriers in building ADUs and having ADUs as this naturally affordable source of housing. So those would be things that you see in cities, this additional ADUs. I know there was a missing middle bill that went a lot further. I'm supportive of that approach, but I just don't see the politics getting it passed yet. And if you look at what other states did when they passed the missing middle bill, they did ADUs first. So California did ADUs in like 2016. They had a couple of bills, and they went from permitting about 1,000 a month to 13,000. I'm sorry, 1,000 a year to about 13,000 statewide.
Wow.
That is a huge increase in affordable housing that wasn't paid for with tax dollars, that was paid for just by the private market and people mostly putting them in their backyards, right? And so let's start to unlock that. Let's start to make sure that people also have the access to the financing and the tools that they need to provide housing that makes their unit more affordable, because now they can pay more mortgage because they're able to get a little bit of rent from that ADU. But you also look at the statistics of who lives in an ADU, and a lot of people don't even pay rent. Like a lot of times it's like a sister or a child, a grown child. There's so many other people that really helps out and just can take pressure off of families. And so some of the stories are like, there's an artist that it's super below market rent, all of that. Like, so these people that we care about in our community, and we want housed in neighborhoods like mine. I live in the lettered streets. It is, people come in from Ferndale. I know a group that comes in from Ferndale to like do walks around the lettered streets because it's so gorgeous. And it's zoned single family now, but if you walk around and if you've ever doorbelled for a barbecue, which I have done because it's really fun, you will see that it's not single family. There's all sorts of little apartments and duplexes. And so it's very clear that this is possible to do while still maintaining the things we loved about our neighborhood. And the Senate, it died in the Senate for various political reasons, but I think we can figure out how to do that. And it's not just that, but I want to spend the next 4 years thinking about housing policy. And it's something that takes a while for you get the policy right, and then you still need the market mechanisms to come through. But we should have done this 10 years ago. We didn't. Now is the next best time to do it. And this is what I want to think about, because I want to make sure that towns like Bellingham aren't just for millionaires, right? I want to make sure that Bellingham doesn't have this unaffordable housing thing that leaks over into Ferndale and Everson and drives up the prices in Nooksack, right? Like, we're all in equilibrium with each other, and we need a statewide solution to this. So that's what I'm really excited to do. I was also supposed to talk about things that Indivisible can do to help. Did you want me to do that, or do I turn it over to Liz?
By all means, take a minute. We're all ears.
Okay, I don't know how long I've been talking.
You are 1 minute over, Sharon. It's just, I
I will turn it over to Liz, and we'll talk later about things Indivisible can do to help.
It's your choice.
I want to hear what Liz has to say.
Okay. Thank you so much, Representative Shewmake. That's amazing. And the mic goes to Liz Lovelett.
Thank you. Now you guys can appreciate how excited I am that Sharon is now running to be in my chamber. She's such a powerhouse behind the budget, helping us work through all these different economic issues. Our only economist in the legislature. So I feel very greedy about wanting her over in my chamber so that we can be a dream team for Whatcom County and make sure that we're delivering for folks all across Whatcom. So I think because Sharon did such an incredible high level job of going through various things in the budget, I'm going to kind of focus on things based on my committee work. And that will give me the opportunity to talk about the transportation budget, which was another milestone achievement for a 60-day session to get a supplemental transportation budget to the governor's desk. So I'll start with transportation. As some of you may know, a couple of years ago, I got together with Representative Dave Paul from the 10th District to be my counterpart in the House, and we formed a ferry legislator caucus, because what we found was that one of the most anemic parts of our transportation system was our ferry system. And since we in the 40th represent the San Juan Islands, it was of utmost importance to help correct all of the terribly disruptive service outages that they have experienced over the last couple of years, especially exacerbated by the COVID crisis. So we had to do a multitude of things. One, we committed to funding 4 new vessels and converting 2 vessels to hybrid electric. We're going to be moving forward with our ferry fleet to be hybrid electric from here forward. And I was really proud because for years I have been working on getting intent language into the budget that basically puts a pin in the idea that we know we haven't fully funded the ferry system until we start delivering a vessel every other year, and that we're electrifying all of our terminals in order for those vessels to be plug and play, because the real carbon savings comes in that time when they're actually at the dock and recharging. So we got intent section language, which I am very proud of, was very excited to have my colleagues support. And it was because we came together as a caucus to really push forward. And I would say, and probably even Sharon got messages about the ferry system up in her district. I mean, all of our constituents were just relentless, bird dogging this for legislators for whom they don't have ferries in their district, because it really is a statewide problem. One of the other, couple of other highlights from the transportation budget, for one thing, kids ride free on transit in Washington State now. That includes buses, Metro, Amtrak, ferries. We wanted to make sure that we are cultivating the next generation of folks who are going to be invested in our transit systems, that know how to get places without a car and can start being the change we want to see in terms of the transportation infrastructure of the future. Additionally, I was really proud to champion an amendment in the transportation budget that ensures that we are actually dealing with stormwater. Right now, we have this incredible fund called MOTCA, the Model Toxics Control Act. It's a volumetric tax that's levied on our refineries at the rack for liquid transportation fuels. And that gets collected in order to do remediation projects. So think Port of Bellingham waterfront. Tens of millions of dollars have come in from MOTCA. But what we haven't been doing is having a very transparent process for being able to identify where those stormwater management pieces are going. And as you can imagine, stormwater is one of the single biggest polluters to Puget Sound. Think of how dirty your car gets at the end of the week. All of that is ordinarily resting on the ground, being captured by the rain and running out into the Salish Sea, contributing to habitat loss all the way up to the challenges we're having with orca recovery. So now we have a more transparent process. It's not only obligated in WashDOT highway projects and such, but we also put a dedicated $500 million into legacy stormwater pollution in some of our hardest to clean up areas, because we know that those neighborhoods and communities and parts of the state have borne the brunt of that pollution for entirely too long. And speaking of underserved populations who we have a real obligation to, we put in $3 billion towards meeting our culvert injunction that we absolutely must do. So this is going to be the cornerstone of this coming decade salmon recovery effort. We know that watershed by watershed, culverts have been making it almost impossible for juvenile salmon to make it upstream to be able to spawn, and that is underscoring an ecological degradation that I think a lot of us have been observing for many years. And we see incredible projects like what we were able to accomplish up in the Nooksack. Rep. Shewmake and I worked on getting some dollars to go into that project several years ago that remediated about 10 miles of habitat and will have the ability to impact salmon recovery all throughout that watershed. So that seems like a perfect spot to segue to climate priorities. I'm the vice chair of the Energy and Environment Committee, and this year I was really proud to champion a bill co-sponsored by Rep. Shewmake to help remediate and restore 10,000 acres of kelp and eelgrass across Puget Sound. So this is the foundational plant life that makes our ecosystems vibrant and provides the habitat that's necessary for juvenile salmon and many other fish species in the nearshore areas in our area. So thrilled to work with Department of Natural Resources to see that bill get to the finish line, and really proud of the team that came together to make sure that bill made it through both chambers. And as Sharon likes to say, it came unanimously out of my chamber, but I think 96 to Vicky Kraft out of her chamber. So, a lot of really positive, near unanimous consensus on the importance of that bill. Also worked with Rep. Paul on one of my favorite kind of wonky issues, but derelict vessel removals. A lot of the pollution that happens in Puget Sound is because people abandon boats and then leave them to leach out all of the nasty chemicals that are inherently in a boat that should be above water. So working to continue Department of Natural Resources campaign to get those vessels out of our waterways, where they're not only navigational hazards, but also ecological hazards. I also had a bill that was a trailer for one I probably told you guys about a couple of years ago. This is called CPACER, which is Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy and Resiliency. So this is an external private sector financial model that helps achieve deep energy retrofits, seismic resilience retrofits for any county that wants to adopt it. But we found out we had one little persnickety technical challenge. And so this was a trailer bill to fix that. And I have to give huge props to my House colleagues, because they pulled it out. I mean, literally the 11th hour. It was dead. Can't believe they managed to resurrect it. Pulled out the 3 minutes that was necessary for it to get off the floor, but literally unlocking tens of millions of dollars of private sector investment to help us achieve our clean building standards in the commercial space, in multifamily, and in the municipal sector. As Vice Chair of Energy and Environment, I also had the privilege of helping shepherd a number of tremendous House bills. One piece that was left out of the Climate Commitment Act and the Clean Energy Transformation Act was the way that we capture methane from our landfills. And we were able to get a bill to the finish line that helps us create methane recapture or flaring in landfills across the state, both in current ones that are currently in use and legacy landfills that have since been capped. So that's an exciting step forward from one of the most dangerous greenhouse gases finally getting dealt with in the way that it needs to be. And universal compost, setting us on a path to be able to have compost facilities across the state and allow us to be able to divert our most methane releasing waste stream that we have, which is our food and yard waste, and make sure that we have that capacity being built across Washington. Now, I also serve on the Housing and Local Government Committee, where I specialize in local government concerns. One of the big ones that I think is going to be really important for places like Whatcom and Skagit County is that we finally closed the Growth Management Act vesting loophole. So this was a kind of a loose end that was left over from the Growth Management Act that really needed to be dealt with, where a developer can come in with a permit for a fully contained community. And if they happen to game it just right and happen to time it just right, they can get their permit vested in a way that makes it unappealable to the Growth Management Hearing Board. So this year, after about 10 years of effort, I worked really hard to get that bill out of the Senate and managed to get it with a 28 vote Democratic vote out of the Senate. And that was a big lift. It's a very wonky policy subject, and it's really hard to explain to people why it's important at a time when we're talking about housing availability and the crisis that we're in with developing houses, to explain why it's important that we don't do that. And so it was really exciting to get that to the finish line. Also, I'll just kind of segue now to a couple of things that are near and dear to my heart as a single working parent living off of my citizen legislature salary. Tend to bring a little bit different perspective sometimes to social issues. So one of the bills that I worked on was to ensure that childcare and other dependent care expenses are explicitly covered and allowable as campaign expenditures. Now, this is going to be really important in Washington State for working families, people who maybe even have a parent or a disabled adult child in their home, to ensure that they have the capacity to be able to run for office, regardless of how expensive that might have been. Campaigning is very time consuming. It's a lot of work, and it can be very personally expensive for the candidate to even be able to compete for a job that they may or may not get. I really believe this is going to help us build the bench of what kinds of people have the opportunity to run for office. Additionally, I ran a bill that helps codify a federal decision to our state, which has to do with the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. So right now, and this smacks of conservative politics, but it used to be that if you have a household where one parent or one adult who's living in the household is not looking for work, irregardless of circumstances or why that may be, you are ineligible for getting food benefits for anybody in that household. And this bill updated that so that regardless of if you have somebody in your household that has sanctioned status, the remaining family members still are able to get food benefits. And when I say that, I'm talking about children. Like, we are literally talking about making sure that we are feeding children. And so this was a really exciting bill to get codified into law. And one of the things I am most proud of is that I've been fighting for a couple of years to get a budget proviso together so that we can have a single point of entry for social services in Washington State. We've had some ability for different agencies to talk to each other, but ultimately, if you, like myself, before I entered the legislature, find yourself applying for food stamps, then you need health care, then maybe you need eyeglasses, or maybe you need fuel vouchers. Each one of those is a separate application, a separate process that is demoralizing and burdensome, and ultimately at the end of the day is not representative of the fact that you're not going to have upward economic mobility in the 3 months since the last time you did all of your income paperwork, and really doesn't take care of the fact that people need holistic safety nets around them if we do expect them to exit poverty. So really proud that we are going to be putting money into WATEC in order to build this platform so that we can share information between the agencies and make it so that if you fill out a form for Apple Health, they'll say, do you also qualify for food stamps? Let's find out. Do you also need eyeglasses? Let's get you set up. And I just really think that that is going to be key in making sure that we are able to deliver services to people across the state. So I saw a little note about gun rights, so I just want to talk about a couple of Democratic priorities that we also got done. One, we protected a woman's right to choose. Again, this year we made sure that our legislation was very clear that it is our intention to perpetually protect a woman's right to choose. Additionally, we banned the sale of assault weapons over 11 rounds, which is a huge deal. We have found statistically that the one thing that we can do to reduce gun violence in our communities is not to sell those kinds of guns in our communities. So we had to dial it so that we weren't, that always the argument about the slippery slope of everybody's coming for our guns. No, we're not coming for your guns, but we're not going to sell them anymore. And so we're hoping that this is going to have a net effect in our communities of safer schools. And I know I can speak for Sharon and I that is just a constant thing that parents worry about anymore, and our kids talk about. Is we used to just do fire drills and earthquake drills, and now they have to do bad person drills. And the fact that that's their reality is not okay. It's not acceptable, and it's our job to make sure we're continuing to move the dial on safety in our communities. Some other big things like apprenticeship programs and extending things for foster kids to make sure they have access to housing. Obviously we can go on and on because we love to wonk out on all this policy stuff, but I'd rather leave more time to make sure that you guys have time to ask us some questions.
Oh, thank you so much, the both of you. I am like imbued with energy just hearing all the stuff that's happening. It's really empowering to know that like the work's getting done. It's not just all doom and gloom in the media. Like that's fantastic. Let's see. I think our format was I'll start it off with a question for Rep. Shewmake, and then Kevin, once she wraps up, Kevin Leja can continue to distribute the questions. But I wanted to ask about the HB 1643. It exempts the sale of real property for affordable housing from the real estate excise tax. So that land trusts and things like that. Were there, Sharon, were there like projects in the hopper, like plots of land that will Collection Community Land Trust, like, well, now did you have like some like shovel ready, not shovel ready, but like, transactions that were like waiting in the wings when you pass that to, and I'm wondering too, if there's an appetite in the legislature to just have the state or the municipalities just donate the land or, give it, offer it at 50% of market value to organizations like the Collection Community Land Trust that will immediately build, affordable housing.
I don't know if there were particular projects that were in the hopper that they wanted to do that, but it's one of those things that just kind of makes sense. As for donating the land, I know this has been something that people have been frustrated by not being able to do more of this and some of the restrictions on that. Some of this is our wacky constitution. My understanding is that using, you can't use public funds for something that's not for the poor or infirm. So you can do it if it's a certain level of AMI, but if you want to do like Collection Community Land Trust that has a higher AMI because they're buying the affordable home, you may not be able to do it that way. And so I was actually talking to someone at WTA. They have a big suite of land that in Linden that they'd wanted to use for farm workers. And I was like, oh, that's great. We should figure out a way to do that. But I don't know how that piece would fit in. I think there's lots of pieces like that though. Maybe the constitutional amendment makes me nervous because not only does it have to pass with really high levels in the legislature, it also has to go onto a vote of the people. If I get to pick a constitutional amendment to change, I'm going to make it school bonds have to be 50% instead of the super majority of 60%. I don't understand why 41% of your community can say, no, we're not going to build a new high school. That's really frustrating. But there's other constitutional amendments I would make, but that would be the one that I would pick first.
Okay, Andrew, do you have another question? Okay.
I just dropped it in the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, I did get a question from one of the core crew members via email who wanted to know about and I think this would be specifically for Representative Shewmake, but perhaps Senator Lovelett also has a take on it. Now that Whatcom County has banned any future development of fossil fuel industries at Cherry Point, how do you foresee industrial development there?
I was talking to someone, I think it was Don Goldberg at the port, and he had some actually kind of incredible visions there of other types of manufacturing. There's not enough industrial land that is developable in Whatcom County. I've heard some people say that Skagit does it better. Other people say Skagit just does it differently. But doing some of that pre-development work, I mean, look at what we just did in Ferndale. There's a new electric bus company manufacturing. People in Ferndale, like people in Whatcom County, we know how to build things. We're a great place to build things. We have that deep water port. I'd love to see us do something that's part of this green energy future, right? I know that BP is, and I believe this of them, that they're real on this. They want to switch to being not just a fossil fuel company, but more of an energy company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're really looking at that net zero goal. You know, it kind of makes sense, right? Like they know how to move around big amounts of carbon around the world. Maybe we could also have them move around the CO2 emissions. I'm not going to like sell my house on this, but like I have been working with them to make sure that we're holding them accountable, and that's where that good policy comes into place. I saw the 2037, and I'd love to talk about that for a second, if that's okay. So that was it was a little bit controversial. I think there might have been some no votes from Democrats coming from the left, but I think that it also did some good things too. One of the things that it did is it created a definition of force. So we said when you can use force, but we never actually defined what force was. And so there are some people that the intention was not to end the Terry stop that you sometimes think about, where they like pat people down and they just make sure that everyone's safe and they can have a conversation. I had lots of conversations with Eric Ritchie, our prosecutor, to better understand these issues. I was not an expert in police reform. I'm not sure I would call myself an expert now, but I know a lot more than I did before getting into this job. And so there were just like conditions like, can you voluntarily handcuff someone? Like if you touch someone, like, you know, police are looking at losing their career if they get sued and do something bad, right? We asked, I think one of the things that caused all the hubbub was we changed the accountability rules, which needed to be changed. And then we also changed what we were asking of them at the same time. And that's just from a human perspective, that's a lot, because you've never been through this new accountability system. You don't know how it works. It's a very people-focused system. It's probably pretty scary. And then to also have your job change at the same time and to be held to a higher standard. Like, I get it. That sounds really hard. And so the defining the use of force, making those definitions, making it clear that, you know, touching someone's shoulder is not a use of force, making sure that if someone's getting into a car and they need help because they're dealing with a crisis, that is not necessarily using force. Like, let's be clear about what we mean by force. And so I think that is a good amendment. I will be honest, I think we're going to be dealing with some of the police reform issues because we said we set a statewide standard on force. And I think that that's a difficult thing to do, but I also think it's a good thing to do, because one of things I heard from the police officers when I spoke to them is, why are we being blamed for something in Minneapolis that's happening there? Right. And I get it. Like, I'm not saying that our police officers are perfect in any way. They're humans too, but they just felt like they were being attacked for things that happened in other places. And so maybe what we should do is we should set a statewide bar where everyone has to do at least this good, because I can't change public opinion, but you are going to be blamed if someone in Tacoma messes up. Like, a police officer in Bellingham is going to lose trust with the public if someone in Ferndale messes up. Yeah. And so that bar makes a lot of sense. It's hard to get right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before we move on, Senator Lovelett, did you have any comments on the Cherry Point issue?
I mean, so of course I have the other two refineries in my district. So between the 4 refineries, it's I think 85% of the total oil that's refined in Washington state. So you know, Sharon and I pay really close attention to refinery issues. I think the implementation of the low carbon fuel standard is going to go a long way for us developing the kinds of fuels that we want to see in the future. We also had positioned Washington State to be ready to work with the federal government to start piloting more hydrogen resources, because we know that we can electrify light duty, but where it gets harder is long haul trucking and shipping. And so we want to make sure that we are creating the next generation of fuel resources. So, you know, at BP and Cherry Point and the refinery in Anacortes, we have the opportunity to do some different cogeneration techniques in order to get green electrolytic hydrogen so that we can use for those harder to reach areas of our transportation sector. And right now, PACCAR, which is in Skagit County, is working on developing a hybrid electric chassis that uses hydrogen as well. So I think we're really positioned to start divesting out of some of these things. You know, basically the thing about energy is there's a lot of much cleaner energies, but everything has an ecological cost, right? So we need to make sure that as we are, you know, refining the minerals for batteries, as we're looking at the end of life care on wind turbine blades, that we're really thinking, I heard the other day, birth to earth, and I really like that concept, that we're making sure that we have labor standards intact, not only for the production of the actual technology, but, you know, to the resource extraction side of things as well, and making sure that we're really taking care of our planet and not heading ourselves down a different ecological disaster because we're trying to avert the one that we're in. I actually just got back from a legislative delegation tour to Spain and Portugal to go to the Wind Europe conference over there to start talking about the opportunities to site offshore wind in Washington State, or probably more to the point, how do we become a hub for supply chain sector? Those blades, when you get it up to actual commercial grade size, each blade is like 150 meters. I mean, they are just enormous. It's hard to imagine. The one infographic that really helped me was they were showing us one that was like a 2 megawatt turbine, and our hotel was quite near their football arena. And so they showed this infographic of the wind turbine in the arena, where it is like hundreds of meters out the top and hundreds of meters across the side. I mean, it's really hard to imagine how big they are. And so thinking about that deep water port access that we have, both at Port of Bellingham, Port of Anacortes, and others, our proximity to Canada, who will be looking into developing some of these technologies, the carbon fiber excellence that we have, the maritime sector excellence that we have. I think that there's a lot of ways that we can start working up our apprenticeship programs in order to make sure that we have the next generation of technicians and mechanics and all the different manufacturing, all the different excellence that I think we have the ability to cultivate in Washington State right now to make sure that we're meeting those workforce challenges, because it's one of the things that's really hard and feels very disingenuous when you go talk to the steel workers and you're like, oh yeah, just go get a job installing solar panels and take an $80,000 pay cut. Like, who wouldn't want to do that? I mean, we have to be realistic about what we're really asking of them. And so I think, you know, making sure that when we build this table to try to ensure that we are in fact achieving a just transition, then there's the piece that is the environmental piece, there's the piece that's the worker piece, and there's the part that's making sure that our economies and local areas that rely on those proceeds are insulated from it. For an example, our school district in Anacortes, for which 35% of the bond and the levy amount is paid by the refineries because of the property value there. So, you know, just really looking ahead with eyes wide open to how we make that transition happen. And I think there's going to be a lot of work in the coming couple of years on what that roadmap is going to look like. But it's really getting everybody to the table now to make sure that we do have all the right people at the table to make sure that we're doing it the way it needs to be done.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think Andrew had a question about for you, Senator, about what sort of legal challenges are being mounted against the assault weapons.
Yeah, well, you know, NRA is going to do what they do. I mean, part of the reason you pass bills sometimes is just to have them challenged in court, because then you can lay it to rest. Because when we're down in Olympia, they'll say, oh, this is never going to survive in court. Okay, well, let's find out. Let's see how it goes. It's been upheld as being constitutional in other states, and I think we have good precedent and an incredible attorney general. This is request legislation from our attorney general's office. So I feel like I have consistently heard AG Ferguson say that he doesn't put proposals out that he doesn't think are legally defensible. And so we're in a really good position with an attorney general that has a fantastic track record of success.
He does have an incredible track record. And I've got to say that it's so fantastic to have two intelligent, articulate legislators like you both to represent us. I think we are so lucky. I really do.
Thank you. We're lucky to have a really engaged constituency, I tell you what.
Sharon, you had mentioned earlier about some things that Indivisible Bellingham members can do to help. And I'd like to hear from both of you about things that we could be working on or things that we might be challenged with over the next few months.
So we're not talking campaign stuff, so I'm not going to do that because this isn't the safe space. I just read something really interesting that felt really right. And that was a political science article saying that state legislators and others overestimate how conservative their constituents are. Both Republicans and Democrats do this. And they think that's because Republicans just write in a lot more. And so it's actually pretty effective. There might be a like new ideas are new and different. And so it takes you a while. This was on, by the way, I was reading an article about like, why is the federal government not making pot legal, even though like 70% of Americans support it, right? Like it's got enormous support and there are legislators that were against it. And why don't we at least like do the banking piece of it, right? Like that should at least be in the states where it's legal or there's medical marijuana, at least they should have access to banking. But there's a few Democratic supporters that don't really, I think there's like 3 Democrats that don't support it. And then all the Republicans are locked up against it. So I was talking about that piece. And so I think like writing in and like mass emails work, but so does also like Myra emails me all the time and I'm like, thanks, Myra. And so like just hearing from people is also really useful, like continuing that communication up. Another piece of that is op-eds. So I found over and over and over again that there are people who only watch Fox News and think that we all, well, now it's like terrible molest children, but think that we all have these loopy ideas that aren't where our ideas are, right? Like there's good, like you can make them sound loopy if you want, but there's actually a reason that we want everyone to have health care. There's actually a reason that we care about climate change. There's actually a reason that we set goals on dealing with climate change. And there's actually a reason why we want well-funded schools. And we want kids to be able to talk about race and the history of America and like have some, before 2020, some employers were coming to Western and they're like, we need your students to be culturally competent. Like this is important at a Fortune 500 company to be able to talk to people of different backgrounds. So please train them in that, right? And so having those conversations, this isn't some like crazy critical race theory, but like just making the case for why we believe what we believe in clear, accessible language over and over again, not using jargon, like that doesn't help. But just making the case of like from a place of kindness and respect. And that wins conservatives over because our ideas are better, our values are better. Their media landscape just might be more like every idea from a Democrat like is great if you can get someone to read the paragraph, but the Republican puts on their bumper sticker. And so it's just really hard to get those nuanced ideas through. So those are 2 big nonpartisan pieces. Postcards are great. That's also really helpful. Lots of people can engage in postcards, hearing those stories, and then lots of other things not on this.
Senator?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One, make sure that you engage with us in the interim because often, by the time it comes to session, we don't necessarily have the time, the bandwidth, or the capacity to work on things in real time, especially if it's like, hey, I have this great idea for a bill. We really need to be working on that months and months and months ahead of time. So making sure that if you have bigger picture things that you want to work on or coalitions that you want to build around things, you want us to come talk to people, you want us to come listen to people, hit us up in the interim when we have the time and the ability to really dig in and focus. And then the other thing I would say is, every once in a while, send some postcards that are thank yous. Because I tell you what, I would say 95% of what we get is strongly worded letters that are so pissed off about this, that, or the other thing that we did. And ultimately, this is a tough job and we have a lot of tough decisions to make. And so hearing, word of thanks every once in a while sure goes a long way to helping buoy us through those hard times when we're in those really difficult negotiations and conversations. And I think, kind of broadly, it's important to remember that there's a lot of different brands of Democrats, just like there's a lot of different brands of Republicans. And, to just assume that one particular way of thinking of things is the way that it's going to work in the legislature, or, that's the way everybody feels, just making sure that you're, taking time to bring in some other perspectives to make make sure that we really have a more comprehensive view on things, because ultimately, we have to get to 25 in the Senate, 50 votes in the House, and to the governor's desk. And it doesn't happen when you're the, staunchest progressive firebrand coming out the gate. We want to have those good policies in place, but we also have to be pragmatic about the way that we get it to the finish line.
One other thing I'd add to that is your 40th and 42nd, and even sometimes Dave Paul, we actually work really well together.
All the time.
Right up issues. Like I privately messaged, I was Myra when Liz was talking about ferries, and I was like, I told you Liz was amazing. Because every time they ask me about ferries, I'm like, go talk to Liz. And that's partially like, we just don't all have like the bandwidth to know every piece of gun rights policy, and I don't always understand the policy pieces. The reason that I hadn't been working on housing much before this is I figured that was another whole complicated area, and someone had it figured out and they didn't have it figured out. And so I got mad, and we're going to work through it, and Liz and I are going to accomplish it, and then we're going to get it through the House and leverage those relationships, right? So like you to a certain extent, you just have to have a little bit of focus. But what we can do is when you say, I really care about this, that, and that, I can say, oh, I know who also works on those issues. Let's see, let me bring that to them. And we're really good at connecting. Like that's the other part of my job that I didn't realize was part of my job, was knowing where the connections are and knowing where, if you have problems, like either with a legislation or someone with ESD, like I can connect you to those people. And that's really helpful.
Yeah. And I would add on to that too, that, our legislative staff is amazing. I mean, I don't know if any of you have like called our offices and had a chance to talk to our LAs, but they are wonderful. And so, during those times when we are in session and things are really hectic, you can download information with them anytime, and we're in constant communication, and they are talented. They are competent. They are so smart and savvy. And we just have an incredible team. And like Sharon said, I mean, we meet every couple of weeks as a delegation with our staff to make sure that we have this communication chain that goes from everywhere from grassroots organizing all the way up to our congressional and federal counterparts, because it's that communication chain that makes this job work. And, we have had so many times where an issue has been highlighted by a constituent, we're able to send it up the chain to the governor's office. And the next thing we know, we're getting things taken care of. And we really take our constituent casework piece of this very seriously. I mean, in my office alone, my LA Jordan, I think he solved like 115 unemployment cases that like people couldn't get through during the pandemic. I mean, they're really just incredible. So, leaning on them as well, knowing that they are just highly, highly competent and really care about what's going on in the community and really have a finger on the pulse of it as well. So it's
what is the best way to contact you? I mean, what do you prefer? An email, your contact form, or a phone call, or what's the best?
Yeah, just reach out to our LAs. They kind of triage what needs to happen at what point. Is this like super time sensitive and we need to take care of it right now? Or is this, a conversation we're going to have in a couple of weeks? Like I said, this time of year, we tend to meet with a lot of folks and just, see what are things that are on the ground issues that we know we're going to need to deal with the coming year. And then we kind of come up with our policy portfolio from there.
The contact form goes to our email, so those are the same. But email, and if we don't respond, email again. Like sometimes things just get lost. Like I tell my students this too, like don't feel bad about bugging me a few times, because sometimes we just get too busy, and that doesn't mean that we don't care. It just got lost.
Yeah. And you may have heard Sharon has like another job and a campaign to run and small children. I mean, maybe you heard that, maybe didn't, but like I
don't, it's all news to me.
I don't know if this is relevant to you guys, or if you want to weigh in on this, but there is a group that's going to be collecting signatures to an initiative called 1929, I believe, which is going to supposedly repeal the capital gains tax. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, good luck.
I hope they don't.
It's amazing to me, the people who get the most bent out of shape about this clearly don't have any idea that they are not paying it, because the numbers are like 900 people in Washington state. And I tell you what, they're not in rural Whatcom County. So, I mean, that just is, it's one of those like false narratives, and they're trying to challenge it as being an income tax against our Constitution. And again, like this is one of those things you need to test in court to see if it's going to stick or not.
Right.
Myra, did you want to ask a question?
She's got it. Okay, you gotta find, it's bottom left-hand corner.
Still muted, Myra. Can the host ask her to unmute so it like,
Philip, can you unmute her?
in the legislature, they can just unmute you and you don't have to.
Oh, there you go. You got it, Myra.
There we go. Okay, sorry. Speaking about initiatives makes me think about a movement that a whole Washington is going to mount on behalf of universal health care for Washington State, and they're going to begin collecting signatures. I forget the number, you guys probably know it. Could you comment on that, please? What do you think of it?
Ooh, who wants to go first on that one?
I support, I mean, we've talked about this. I support a single payer system. Like I've had, you look at other countries, they have better results and lower costs when you don't have a whole bunch of insurance companies. And then I always tell the story personally, like I have two kids. One was born here at St. Joe's. The other one was born in England. And it was, you know, it was free in England. It was $10,000 at St. Joe's. I did get better sandwiches at St. Joe's. Because I really had to I had to send Nick out to get me snacks. It was a little bit nicer. I also had a private room at St. Joe's and I didn't in England. But that wasn't worth $10,000. I wouldn't have paid that for it. And then the other thing that was really different was here, like as you approach your pregnancy, you see the doctor once a week, and it was a low risk pregnancy. That was stupid. At St. Joe's, I didn't even see a in England, I didn't even see a doctor. It was midwives the entire time up until I was getting that epidural, basically. That's why the doctor was there. They even tried to convince me to go to the midwife center, but they said, maybe not, maybe you should go to a hospital because you're an American. That was why, not because I was low risk or anything, just because that's what they expected. But the really big difference that we see over and over again in the research pays incredible dividends is they sent a midwife home within 24 hours to come and check on me and the baby. And like, that was incredible. Like, I'm getting teary eyed thinking about how powerful that was. Like, cause you come home with your first child and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. It just yells at me. It doesn't speak English. Like it seems so delicate. And so she made sure he was breastfeeding. She like weighed him. She checked on my scars. She probably was looking around to make sure we didn't have like knives in the couches and weren't smoking on his face or something, just to make sure he was safe. And here in America, it's like 6 weeks later, you get an appointment, you have to go to the doctors, which isn't always easy. And you're seeing a doctor, not a midwife, when I think the midwife is probably more appropriate. And it's like, hope everything was okay. You know, like hope you weren't suffering from postpartum depression and you were able to feed the child and nothing was going horribly wrong. It's so nuts the way we do this. Yeah. And so you think about it, like America, we do the healthcare that you can bill for. In England, they do the healthcare that's actually like cost effective and research and blah, 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 right? And so I think switching to a system like that, where we just change the fundamental incentives, is a huge piece. It's also incredibly complicated. And so I know that we've been working on steps on that, and you might have read in the newspaper about the public option and how it wasn't really saving money and how we had to do a bill to kind of make it save money a little bit more. It's a massive system that's really hard to change. So I would support a public option, or not a single payer solution. I don't necessarily know the way that we get there. And I want a really good plan for that. So I'll look at the whole Washington and I'll ask some experts on whether or not they think that is a good plan.
Putting something in the chat here too, because now I used to be a doula, so I get really excited when I think about I had my kids at home with a midwife, and it was an incredible experience. But we did get a Doulas for All bill, making sure that people have that covered as like part of their insurance and part of something that we wanted to make sure that women have access to, because the outcomes are just tremendous. And then did update scope of practice for midwives so that they can prescribe medications for, you know, really common things like mastitis and that sort of thing. So.
Great.
Michael, you've had your hand up a couple of times.
Well, Philip and I have been having this running battle about whether I can make a comment, but I'm looking at, we're almost at the end. I just wanted to say two things and then one very inarticulate comment. I am amazed by the both of you. I cannot believe that anybody could be 712 times smarter than me and be articulate, but you're both absolutely astound me every time I hear either of you. What is more what more awes me is how many issues in this hour or so you've raised, from supermajorities of school to the childcare costs of being a candidate to 400 other things. So if I look at myself, because I'm trying to look at indivisible community with this group of people, you know, I'm involved in lots of different things. And the way that I resolve the what to do, along with when Kevin puts forth the TAN mechanism, which is a pretty easy way for somebody with limited time now. So I listened to the two of you on the 17,000 issues you've raised. And I think for the coming set of months, Sharon already knows this, the way that I deal with it is not here, I got to work on the cost of childcare for candidates. I got to work for a candidate who in the upcoming elections will be skilled like the two of you are on those 9 million issues. So the inarticulate piece is I'm hoping that you both feel comfortable in forwarding onto us messages about things that you think the indivisible types of the world can move on. But don't send us a trillion ideas. Send us like 3. And I'm teasing, but I'm not really teasing, because most of the activist community has a lot of things going on. So I just love what you guys are doing. But make sure you give us your ideas of things that you think we can do.
I think Myra, you can chip in, and then I think we gotta let these hardworking ladies go to sleep at some point.
Just really fast. I am thrilled at the notion that Sharon is going to be in the Senate as part of that team that you guys have built up. But we have to have 6 people in that team. And I'm really concerned about filling Sharon's seat, because that will be an open seat now. And we have to keep it. And I think that could be a hard one, and we really have to focus on doing that. I know Sharon's going to win her seat, but we got to win that House seat. We got to keep it. And then we have 6 people in your team, and that would just be the best.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Myra. Yeah, I mean, without displaying hubris, I also share your opinion that Sharon will roll. But we have to work hard to make sure it happens. But yeah, we have 2 good candidates for the other state rep seat. I'm going to be back in Joe Timmons because Jay was a childhood friend of mine. But if we're good to wrap up, Kevin, Liz, and Sharon, are you? Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Myra said, I mean, please, everyone use this meeting as just a jumping off point. If you do one thing, like a half a day on TAN or a day of direct voter contact for Sharon or Liz, it will, you know, if 1,000 people go out and do that, it's landslide victories and, you know, sweep for Whatcom County, which we're all, you know, salivating over. Yeah, so please make sure to get up from behind your computers, you know, and write postcards or canvas, or Sharon, I'll be seeing you real soon.
And I want to bring up too, you know, we only are able to accomplish all of these things when we maintain our majority. And we have a lot of swing district races. And so thinking about not just the help that you can give in our own swing races, but also how you can be helpful in some of those other ones where, you know, we stand to lose a lot. And, you know, like in my race, I won by something like 20,000 votes. In some of the swing races, they win by like 100. Like, you can't take anything for granted. That's why I said the thing about never think you've got anything in the bag. Like, the second you kind of let yourself relax is when, you know, things can go sideways. So really just making sure that we really have an all hands on deck approach to elections, both at home and where we can be helpful in elections across the state.
Like where?
like the 26th district down in Bremerton, like the 10th district here in Island County, there's a couple, I mean, I don't know how far on the campaign side of things you can get. Maybe that's a question for another time. But we have a lot of upset swing districts this year that are going to be challenging to maintain, and they're going to be real tight, and they always come down to the last bitter end of the count.
My fiance is giving me the wrap it up signal. So
I know I still have to make dinner.
I'm gonna go. Everyone, I mean, Kevin, I'll leave you in Kevin Lage's very capable hands.
She's a good timer. Thank you both. We really appreciate it, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. We'll give you some information in an email or on Facebook real soon about the next meeting.
Sounds good. Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
everybody.
Bye.